Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is Commissioner Rafael Lopez, and I am the Commissioner of the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families at the United States Department of Health and Human Services. We are thrilled to have you here both in person and virtually from across the country, and we encourage you to join us in this conversation using the hashtag 20NCCAN, or the 20th National Conference on Child Abuse and Neglect. This afternoon, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to hear from extraordinary partners who are on the cutting edge of really bending the arc of justice in child welfare and the arc of justice writ large. And it's one of the things that we've been talking about over the course of the last couple of days. And as we think about, the larger conference theme of building hope and building community, at the end of the day, it's always about the actions that we take, the courage that we display, the risks that we take individually and collectively as a country to sort of explore new frontiers in ways that we've never explored. And this panel is doing just that. And I want to take you way behind the scenes about what this panel was originally conceived to do and how we had to switch it as a result of just good old-fashioned timing. This panel originally was intended to announce publicly the release of what we believe is going to be the most overarching and comprehensive guidance to the country about the importance of treating every single young person in this country who is self-identified as LGBTQ with the dignity and respect they deserve, and to make sure that if they are in foster care in this country and that if they are part of a system that receives funds from us, that they cannot ever be discriminated against. And this is the framework we are working on. We had hoped to have it ready for you today to release it and to walk you through with this extraordinary panel how it would work. But we're not quite there yet. And rather than pretend, we thought we'll take you behind the scenes of what it's like to be the first in the country to do things, or to be the first ever at breaking boundaries, or the first ever to reimagine, or to build community, or to build hope, or to bend that arc towards justice and child welfare for the first time ever, not just in United States history, but in our world history. And we frame it this way intentionally, because we are all on the precipice of using new kinds of language. We are all on the precipice of understanding each other's humanity in deep and new and powerful ways, all driven by the fact that each of us are born with extraordinary power of our own. And you've heard this from so many people throughout the conference. We heard it earlier today in the voices and the stories of alumnus of care in the foster care system. We heard it in the voices and the stories of mothers whose lives have been touched by the child welfare system. We've heard it in our master sessions. We've heard it in our workshops. And every single one of those pieces are connected by an overarching narrative that it takes risk and courage to bend this arc of justice in child welfare. And I want to frame up this panel, before I turn it over to our Chief Deputy, Jenny Wood, who's going to be moderating this, by a few thoughts about grounding us in the data of what we know now that happens to LGBTQ children, youth, who are in this nation's child welfare system. I want to ground us in two first-of-its-kind studies to sort of give you a sense of why this is so urgent and why we must act, not just morally and ethically, but in the name of all of us in this country. First, we released a couple of months ago a first-of-its-kind study funded by our Family and Youth Services Bureau and conducted by researchers at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, which focused on 873 youth ages 14 to 21 in 11 cities across our country. You can download the study by Googling FYSB, F-Y-S-B, Street Outreach Report. We're happy to put it on the conference website as well. And I want to lift up a couple of the most devastating or dramatic kinds of data points that I would imagine might shock all of you, or perhaps some of you not so much. Of the 873 youth in these 11 cities, respondents included those street youth who were already receiving services from one of our programs, the Street Outreach Program, as well as youth who were not currently using our services from our Street Outreach Program grantees that are spread across the country. And the study found the following. One, the average youth spent nearly 2 years living on the streets. 2 years. More than 60% of our young people were raped, beaten up, robbed, or otherwise assaulted. Nearly 30% of participants identified themselves as gay, lesbian, or bisexual, and nearly 7% identified as transgender. About half of the youth in this particular study had been in foster care, and youth with a foster care history had been homeless for much longer, or 27.5 months on average, compared to youth who had never been in foster care, which was 19.3 months on average. And more than half of these respondents also needed a place to stay, a safe place to lay their head, help with their education, access to laundry facilities, a place to study, to rest, or spend time during the day, and a phone. The next first-of-a-kind study I want to lift up, in which we have been deeply involved at the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families, is one that specifically highlighted a very important fact in Los Angeles County, California. Los Angeles County happens to be the most populous county in the entire nation. Its budget as a county is larger than many small states in the country. It is also home to the nation's largest child welfare population. And the highlight of that study was that LGBTQ foster youth were twice as likely to report poor treatment and more likely to live in group homes and to have more foster care placements than their peers. And I'm going to dig a little bit deeper in the data, again, to ground us in why this work is so profoundly important to all of us here today. In the study, key findings included the following. 19% of foster youth identify in LA County's child welfare system as LGBTQ, or broken down 13.4% LGB or questioning, and 5.6% transgender. That's as much as twice the estimated percentage of youth not in foster care who are LGBTQ. Generally speaking, LGBTQ foster youth mirror the racial and ethnic demographic factors of all foster youth in Los Angeles County, the majority of whom are people of color. The study found that over 86% of our young people in the system who are part of this study, that 86% of them were Latino, Black, or API identified. More than 18% of all respondents reported experiencing discrimination related to their perceived sexual orientation or gender identity expression, and some of whom identify as LGBTQ. LGBTQ youth in the study are more than twice as likely to live in a group home and have a higher average number of home placements. And these same youth are twice as likely to report being treated poorly by the foster care system, the very system in whose name the workers are working to protect, to lift up, to empower our young people. Finally, the percentage of LGBTQ youth who were hospitalized for emotional reasons, or 13.5%, was nearly triple the percentage of similar hospitalizations for non-LGBTQ youth, which was 4.2%, but physical reasons for hospitalization were reported less often. However you cut any one of these data points, however in your own head or your own heart you want to interpret these facts, we should be asking the question, is this good enough for our nation's children, youth, and families? Is this good enough for our friends and neighbors? Is this good enough for our babies? And I know that for my two boys, the answer is resolutely hell no. Because we can do so much better by all of our young people, whether they self-identify as LGBTQ or they are anybody else in the world. And the question for us, as we think about first-of-its-kind studies, the one at UCLA that was conducted by the UCLA's Williams Institute and Holarchy Consulting in partnership with the Los Angeles Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual Center, or the first-of-its-kind study prepared by our colleagues at our Family Youth Services Bureau and the University of Nebraska. These first-of-its-kind studies, we hope one day won't ever be again first-of-its-kind studies, right? That we will have the kind of justice that every single one of our children and youth deserve. So with that data, with that framing, with the notion that we are on the cusp of, as a community, as a country, as panelists, as humans, treating ourselves all with the dignity and respect that we deserve, please join me in welcoming to the stage Chief Deputy Danny Wood, who will introduce our panelists, frame up the conversation, and lead us through an intriguing conversation. And we hope to see you and share with you soon the public release of the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families policy statement to, again, expand opportunity and justice to all Americans. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, Raphael. And thanks to this fabulous panel that I have so enjoyed working with over the course of the last few months as we grind out the specifics of this very exciting LGBTQ policy announcement that we will be making very, very soon. And today, my job in this particular forum is to provide a preview of what this policy announcement will entail. And of course, we will provide opportunity at the end of this session to get feedback, receive questions, hopefully answer your questions, or jot down, oh, that's a good question, something that we need to be thinking about. After I speak, we will have a fabulous array of folks to share both about their personal experiences in care, whether that be as a young person or a parent, as well as the policy and legal and practice opportunities that we have before us in terms of the rights and the protection of LGBTQ youth and families who may experience the child welfare system. So with that said, I'll share a little bit about why now. So some folks may have been asking, why didn't we, in our 2011 information memorandum that we sent out as at the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families under Commissioner Brian Samuel's leadership, go further? Why couldn't we have said discrimination is not allowed whatsoever at that point in time, as opposed to dancing a little bit around encouraging non-discrimination and not quite getting as far as we could go? Well, I think part of this is, of course, we have seen a tremendous amount of progress over the course of the last few years alone, even just the last few months, this last year. We've seen an immense amount of progress within the federal government with exciting declarations from the Department of Education and the Department of Justice regarding gender identity and sexual orientation. And part of this is new court cases that have come to fruition that have given us additional constitutional authority as well as federal court oversight that says, yes, we can, this is possible, and our children and families deserve it. So we are very excited to give a bit of a preview into what exactly we are going to be announcing that goes further and build upon the 2011 guidance that the Children's Bureau has issued previously around how do we serve our LGBTQ youth and families in child welfare, and what kinds of rights do they have based on federal statute and the Constitution. So first and foremost, Raphael touched a bit upon this, but just to reiterate, we will indeed be announcing that no child welfare agency, so a Title IV-E or 4B agency, will be allowed to discriminate on in any kind of way. So that may be a not blatant discrimination, but inferred, or perhaps not being given an opportunity to take part in an activity, a club, for example. No one can deny opportunities to young people or discriminate against a young person in foster care who identifies as LGBTQ or may have a different sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, period. So no discrimination whatsoever, and if you do discriminate in any kind of way, then your federal funds for foster care are in jeopardy. So first is youth. Second, no Title IV-E agency and their contractors and grantees, which is also included for young people, shall deny the opportunity to discriminate against any parent or prospective parent seeking to foster, provide kinship care, adopt, or reunify with their children on the basis of the parent's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. And third, we will be announcing that, of course, we've been very clear about this through our guidance through HHS with SAMHSA and the White House, but we want to make it crystal clear that in foster care, no dollars that we provide to the United States in any way, shape, or form will be used for so-called conversion therapy or any other attempt to change, condemn, or pathologize the sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression of any youth under the responsibility of any child welfare agency in the country. So we're very, very excited about that. We can clap and be excited that these are the proclamations that we will indeed be making in the coming months. Now, I will also say a little bit about the basis on which we are able to make these proclamations and declarations and this policy announcement. First and foremost, we are basing this policy decision on our existing statute. So for example, in the Social Security Act, Title 4E, we have a case review system. And that case review system, specifically outlined in statute, is designed to achieve placement in a safe setting that is most family-like, least restrictive, and most appropriate for the best interest and particular special needs of the child. And we are declaring that that includes their sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Additionally, in the Title 4B of the Social Security Act, we talk, in statute, there is specific language that talks about preventing the need to come into foster care and providing reasonable efforts to families. So if there is an instance where a young person may be coming out or expressing a different gender identity than perhaps their family caregivers are particularly comfortable with, and there may be some tension regarding their LGBTQ identity or their process coming out, then we should be able to provide resources to that family, prevention resources that are provided to the country through the Title 4B section of the Social Security Act to work with that family to provide counseling, to provide supports so that that family does not have to go through any type of separation, that child does not have to come into care or run away based on the fact that their family is struggling to accept their sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, of course, we know that that's not a safe situation for every young person, but we want to be very clear that, in fact, our funds through the Social Security Act should indeed be used for these purposes in these types of circumstances. Additionally, we also have the John Chafee Foster Care Independence Program. And this program, in statutory language, also lays out fair and equitable treatment, as well as developmentally appropriate activities as a mandate within this particular piece of statute. And we believe that this language requires that Chafee dollars be used in a manner that is consistent with the young person's sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. So first and foremost, we are basing our policy announcement on these particular pieces of law, as well as other programs within the Children's Bureau's jurisdiction. Given that this is a preview, we're not going to go into all of the statutory language, but that's the general gist of the policy announcement in terms of the statutory basis by which we are declaring that no funds should be used for any type of discrimination. And in fact, young people's sexual orientation and gender identity should indeed be affirmed, and that they should receive the appropriate types of opportunities that are developmentally, culturally appropriate for their growth. Now, one may ask, well, is there a faith-based exemption of any kind? Our clear answer is absolutely not. We have looked at this very carefully with our legal counsel, and we have been able to ensure that this particular policy announcement is absolutely critical to ensuring the broadest pool of qualified prospective caregivers is available to foster and adopt young people in foster care. We also see this as directly in alignment with the statutory requirements as outlined in the Social Security Act. And we do not see any way that the protections, that in any way that anyone could permit faith-based discrimination, period, in this particular type of instance. So we also, of course, are building on recent court cases as well. That's part of our justification for this policy announcement. And those include Obergefell, of course, where the Supreme Court stated, sexual orientation is both a normal expression of human sexuality and immutable. Therefore, we are taking the declaration that marriage equality is now legal across the entire nation and applying those same values of family and justice for families, whether they be straight, gay, lesbian, transgender, that everyone has the right to a family, and therefore these rights are embedded not only in our child welfare statute, but fundamentally in our U.S. Constitution. A couple more things that I wanted to say about enforcement of this new policy announcement. We will indeed be using a variety of levers that we currently use within the Children's Bureau and the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families. Of course, folks in the room may be familiar with our Title 4E and 4B process. This is, again, a reference to the specific statutory authority of the Social Security Act. And within those realms, we typically will investigate a situation when it comes to our attention. So, for example, someone may let our regional office know that there's some discrimination going on, has been reported by youth and families in their community. Our regional office then gets in touch with that agency and says, this is what we're hearing. We would like to hear your perspective. Then we go through an investigation process. And if indeed that investigation comes back and we identify that indeed there is discrimination going on, then we go through a program improvement plan process with that state. If indeed the program improvement plan terms are not met, there is a fine. So this is the type of enforcement policy that's consistent with enforcement in our overall jurisdiction of Title 4E and 4B. And then additionally, I mentioned the Chafee Independent Living program. Specific penalties are outlined in Chafee, and these types of penalties will indeed be applied accordingly for funds that may not be used in a fair and equitable way and consistent with non-discrimination. So specifically, a penalty of 1 to 5% of Chafee allotment may be disallowed if indeed we find a violation present. So I'll go ahead and stop there since I think I am well over my time, but that's a bit of a preview of what's to come. I am also happy to answer questions about what types of technical assistance we are making available in order for states to not only read and digest this policy announcement, but also train their staffs, train their frontline caseworkers, and their foster parents and adoptive parents in a manner that is consistent with inclusivity and ensuring that LGBTQ youth and families have the services and the unique approach that may be necessary in particular cases when youth may be coming out, or there may be other challenges that may be surrounding those circumstances. So happy to answer questions about our workforce training, as well as technical assistance and opportunities for training more broadly in the question and answer section. So I'd like to go ahead and start by introducing Sixto Cancel, who is one of my favorite people and also an alumnus of foster care. He currently is the CEO of Think of Us, which is a phenomenal organization bridging the divide between technology and child welfare, or at least trying to bring child welfare into a new century in terms of technology use, and doing some really creative and innovative projects related to the use of technology for both youth and families directly and child welfare agencies. So without further ado, I turn it over to my friend Sixto Cancel.
Thank you, Jenny. So this is a very proud moment because I have to say this is the first time where someone actually gets the introduction of what we do right.
Oh, good.
So we all should give her a second round of applause. So my name is Sixto Cancel, and I'm very excited about all the movement and all of the energy that's going on. We wish some of the energy would, get up and move closer to the front, but we understand where you're at today. I won't bug you too much. But as I thought about, what to share on this panel, I really wanted to, it's easy to talk about some of the things around how is it, some of the stories that we hear where young people are sent to conversion camps, right? Some of my fellow advocates have experienced that, where young people, are kicked out of their homes, X, Y, and Z. And I can talk about some of those experiences, even from from the personal side. But today I kind of wanted to emphasize a bit more of what I see the huge danger area, even with this movement of in this new policy guidance, which is these small microaggressions that some of them are systematic, some of them are not, but these small microaggressions that still have the powers, just as much power as kicking a young person out of their home. So to me, I started my journey back I entered foster care at 11 months, and I just want to take a moment to kind of think about what does it mean to be in foster care for someone, right? So when you enter foster care, there's something that happened, and you're in the system. And most of the time, you probably, you may understand or you may not completely understand why you're in the system, but it starts to create a belief. And that belief is that there's something wrong. And sometimes we internalize that to say that there's something wrong with me, right? And so that's one of the foundational experiences that you start to experience. And then on top of that, when you have a sexual orientation or a gender identity or a gender expression that is different from the majority of the world, then you really start to think there's something wrong, right? And it is the people who are around us who actually encourage us and who guide us through those things. But for so many young people in foster care and so many young people disconnected from families, that's not the case for them. And that's where we start to see a lot of wiring that young person's brain in the wrong way. So we know during adolescence that our physical experiences, right, what we experience wires our brain. And if that's the case, how are young people who are LGBT in foster care and experiencing multiple different types of oppression, how are their brains being wired? What type of development is really there? So that's one of the things I ponder upon when I start to think about LGBT young people in the different systems in foster care and so on. So at 11 months, I entered foster care. By the age of 6, I was placed back with my biological mother, and by the age of 7, came back into the system. And at 9, adopted by a pretty, abusive and racist, homophobic woman. And so by 13, I was couch surfing. And when I re-entered foster care at 15, this is where there was a bit of hope. I went to a couple more homes, but what was really helpful were the staff that were around me. I was involved in a lot of different activities. But one of the things that was going on while I was a teenager is that there was a lot of self-hatred, a lot of self-doubt, thinking to myself, I used to tell myself that I won't be gay by the time I get to college. It was a rule. I entered college the first day and I was like, gosh, I'm still gay. So, but this is, these are the beliefs, and some of it having to do with religion, some of it having to do with the placement, and a lot of it also having to do with the staff members who were so important to me. Because they were the stable thing that even as I went from home to home, I still got to see the same staff people, right? And so I had this wonderful worker, who was an advocate on everything else. I mean, would fight to the grave, right? But when it came down to my sexual orientation, it wasn't that she was actively fighting against it, but she also wasn't actively supportive. And so as a 15-year-old, I had to figure out how was it that I was going to navigate some of the feelings that I was having. And in Connecticut, I grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, there's a very unique organization called True Colors, and they put on this conference where about 3,000 young people from all over the country come just to celebrate and to understand and to learn their SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, right? And so I was finally able to attend, and it wasn't because my social worker submitted the referral like the other social workers had done, but it was because that organization knew and had been exposed to me through other activities and said, you need to come. And once I got there and I saw that how so many people had accepted themselves, really come to terms with who they were, and realized that even if you put a deadline that by college you won't be gay, probably it's not going to work. It was there that a big relief came off of me. And that translated to what I started to believe what was possible for myself. And how did I see my future self being? And I think that for so many young people, that they experience these small microaggressions. They're a social worker who won't actively make sure that they're being connected to a community of people that they can identify. Or the fact that one night I had to remove them. And it was a pretty hard removal because this was a foster parent that I had picked, who became a foster parent just because of me. Or at least I thought that. And on that night that I was removed, for some reason the conversation had went from, this new home to talking about sexual orientation, which, was just not appropriate when you're being removed from a home. That's one. But secondly, what alarms me most now, thinking back to this, is the fact that she had printed papers and articles around, sexual orientation and what does God really want. And I think to myself that it is okay for people to believe what they believe. That is not the argument here, even in this statute. But what we know about development and what we know about healthy outcomes for young people is that despite our beliefs, that we have to act in a developmentally appropriate way for our young people. And so when it comes down to church and state, and I am someone who I consider myself to be very spiritual, I truly believe that when it comes down to the services and the promise that the government makes when they take us from our home to promise us a better future, that there should be a separation. And that separation was so clear in this moment. So my first night when I went into this new foster home, not only did I have to process the conversation I just had, but the fact that this wasn't even an adequate foster home for me. First of all, I was terrified of dogs, right? So not only was the conversation terrifying because of hell and the revelation, but then you go in and you see 2 German Shepherds and 2 pit bulls, and that's enough. And so to me, I think to myself that when we think about it, the policy guidance, it's going to be very clear that the outright things that are done around sending young people to conversion camps, foster homes who are not accepting, which I've experienced also, those are going to be things that come to light and we're going to have to battle with. But we have to ask ourselves the question, and it's also the audience in this room, we really have to ask ourselves, how is it that we really start to prepare for the small microaggressions that have just as much as impact as kicking someone out on that day? And that's why I pass it.
Awesome job. Oh, hello. Back on. Thank you, Sixto. That was always inspiring and insightful, as you can always be. So our next speaker is Emily Hecht McGowan. Emily is the Director of Policy at the Family Equality Council. And I will say that Emily has been working tirelessly on ensuring that LGBTQ families have the services and the opportunities that all families deserve for many, many years now. She has been a champion behind introducing legislation on the Hill squarely about equality for families year after year. She was the champion behind ensuring that the Children's Bureau has continuously taken steps closer and closer to equity for LGBTQ youth and families. And she has been the champion behind helping us think through and put together this policy announcement. So without further ado, Emily, come on up.
I was originally going to sit, but I think standing is less uncomfortable. So I just want to thank Commissioner Lopez and Jenny. I kind of gave them a little bit of a hard time because the guidance has been a little bit delayed from where we thought it was going to be issued, and I'm getting ready to go out on parenting leave. But sitting here listening to you announce it publicly, recording it, and kind of speaking the words that we've been talking about for so long is incredibly gratifying. So almost as gratifying as actually issuing the guidance. So I just want to thank you. You have both worked tirelessly since coming into your positions to get this done, and we are tremendously, I think I speak on behalf of all of the colleagues up here who have also been working for years on this particular issue. We are grateful. So I'm here, I'm going to speak to you a little bit about the parenting piece here. My colleagues are going to address more specifically the youth, the LGBTQ youth in foster care piece. But my organization was founded in the late 70s, originally by parents who were coming out of different sex marriages. They had come out, had left their original marriages, and were frightened about losing access to their children. So this is the issue around access to protections for our families, for lesbian and gay and transgender adults has been one that's been going on for decades. This is not new. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overarching kind of context for why this guidance at this moment in time is right and critical. So a little background on who LGBTQ-headed families are. There are currently at least 6 million people in this country with at least one LGBTQ-identified parent. There are at least 3 million parents in this country who identify as LGBTQ. Nearly half of all LGBTQ women and 1/5 of all LGBTQ men are raising a child under the age of 18. Same-sex couples, which is where we have the best data, who are raising children are geographically diverse. We live in 93% of all U.S. counties across the country. Our families are more likely to be racially and ethnically diverse than families headed by different sex couples. And we know through data collected and anecdotally that LGBTQ parents are more likely than non-LGBTQ people to foster and adopt children with special needs. And while the largest numbers of LGBTQ people live in the places where you would expect them to live, on the coasts in states like California and New York and Massachusetts, where protections at the state level for LGBTQ people are more robust, the largest proportions of same-sex couples actually live in states with no protections at the state level. In states like Mississippi and Alabama, Louisiana and Georgia, through the Midwest and Upper Midwest, and states like Montana and Wyoming, which surprises a lot of people. Those are states where there are zero protections at the state level for LGBTQ people and families. It's also an interesting data point to note that through research we know that same-sex couples raising children are 4 times more likely than their different sex counterparts to be raising an adopted child, and 6 times more likely to be raising a foster child. So we also have, we know that LGBTQ people have been raising children forever. But we have a solid 4 decades of research now that tells us that children raised by LGBTQ people have, and same-sex couples have the same outcomes as children raised by different sex parents. And when you look at the research and compare apples to apples, that rings true every single time. And what this research also tells us is that the children raised by same-sex couples and LGBTQ parents, because of the stigma that they and their families have endured over the years and throughout their lifetimes, are sometimes more capable and more resilient as adults because of those things that they've had to learn how to deal with successfully as children. So that's just kind of a background on the landscape of families across the country. So we get to the question of kind of how did we get to this point in the LGBTQ movement where the time is ripe for this kind of non-discrimination guidance, why we need to go further to protect families. And I want to emphasize that when we talk about non-discrimination against LGBTQ prospective parents in the child welfare system, it is about treating people equally, right? Giving everybody the same opportunity to be considered, right? It's not about special rights. We hear that a lot. It's about removing barriers that categorically deny a certain group of people, in this case LGBTQ people, from even applying or even being considered as foster and adoptive parents. They have to be otherwise qualified, right? But there are barriers that still exist that will categorically deny LGBTQ people from ever entering the system as a prospective parent. And when we do that, when we remove those barriers, we are opening up more homes to the 400,000 kids who are in foster care. These are numbers that are familiar to everybody in this room. There are 100,000 kids who are available for adoption in every given year. 23,000 of those youth age out every year. Every child that ages out, for as hard as the child welfare system works, as hard as social workers and caseworkers work to provide the best possible care for children in the system, every time a child ages out of that system without finding a permanent family, we've failed. So if we don't open up every door and remove every barrier, we're not doing our jobs. That's what this is primarily about. So as I said, we know that LGBTQ people have been raising families for decades. We have the research. And what's notable is that the primary arguments around advancing equality for the LGBTQ community for years was, what about the children? You're going to damage children if you make acceptable relationships between gay and lesbian people, same-sex couples. And these arguments were used to deny us everything from employment protections to parenting rights to recognition of our relationships. And remember that it was only a mere 13 years ago where our relationships were still criminalized in many states across the country. It's not been that long. The LGBT community fought battle after battle in the courts for relationship recognition, for parental rights. And anti-LGBT parentage laws popped up in states across the country, everything from outright bans against gay and lesbian people being able to adopt, to cohabitation bans, where any adult who was cohabiting with a person outside of a marriage was denied the ability to foster or adopt children. Because same-sex couples could not marry at those times, these were directly targeting the LGBTQ community. And time and again, while there were minimal advances, courts determined that our relationships weren't entitled to equal recognition under the law, and that somehow we were inferior. We were an inferior choice to be parents to these children that were in question. And then there was a shift. Around 2008, 2009, the LGBTQ community started talking about our families differently. You know, we started talking about our families publicly, putting them out there, having conversations with our neighbors, our coworkers, our families. People started to see that LGBTQ parents were raising children, and were just as concerned as they were with their families and making sure their children were thriving. So public opinion started to shift. And by 2012, the LGBTQ movement had significant wins at the ballot box. We had, for the first time, won marriage initiatives by popular vote. And that brings us to March of 2013, where we have Prop 8 and the Windsor cases, where in those victories at the U.S. Supreme Court, Justice Kennedy not only talked about relationship recognition, but he talked about it in the context of children and families, right? He talked about how laws like the Defense of Marriage Act humiliates tens of thousands of children now being raised by same-sex couples. He talked about the importance of families and communities and how children need to view themselves as part of those communities in their daily lives. And by the time Obergefell was decided in March of 2015, only 2 years later, we went from six states in the District of Columbia recognizing marriage equality to 36 states in the District of Columbia recognizing marriage equality. So we had this incredible momentum. For the first time, we had more than 50% of the population in favor of marriage equality and relationship recognition, of LGBTQ people raising children. And Obergefell did the same thing. In his decision in Obergefell, Justice Kennedy also talked about relationship recognition and the value of recognizing those relationships and the necessity of doing it so that same-sex couples had the ability to raise families and protect them under the law, just like everybody else. It was a fundamental right. So now we arrive at this moment in time, where not only is the federal government no longer prevented from recognizing our relationships, but we also have nationwide marriage equality as a fundamental right. And while marriage equality has brought a great deal to the LGBTQ community, we know that marriage isn't a solution to all the struggles that the community faces. And more specifically, it does not remove all of the barriers that exist in creating and protecting families, right? There are critical pieces of the work that are left unfinished, and Jenny outlined most of the, many of those in her remarks. And one of the primary ways in which LGBTQ people have always created our families is adoption through foster care. Just to give you a little bit of background, only 8 states currently provide affirmative non-discrimination protections to LGBTQ people seeking to become foster parents. And while every state allows a single person to petition to adopt alone and married couples to petition to adopt jointly, most states do not have affirmative non-discrimination laws or policies on the books preventing discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And even worse, there are 4 states, Virginia, North Dakota, Mississippi, and Michigan, that affirmatively permit state-licensed child welfare agencies to refuse to place and provide services to children and families, including LGBTQ people and same-sex couples, if doing so conflicts with their religious beliefs. This is what Jenny talked about earlier in terms of no religious exemptions under this new guidance. In 2016, there were dozens of bills introduced at the state legislatures across the country that would have provided a broad license to discriminate against LGBTQ people under the guise of religious liberty. Many of these bills would have permitted state licensed child welfare agencies from the very kind of discrimination that I just described. There were 4 bills that were specifically targeting child welfare providers. Those bills were in Florida, Alabama, Texas, and Michigan. And while we defeated 3 of those bills, many of my colleagues, the organizations my colleagues on the stage represent, worked with us to help defeat those at the state level. We lost in Michigan. And the governor of Michigan had no reservations about signing that bill into law and effectively denying children in Michigan's child welfare system from every opportunity to find their forever homes. We anticipate that with the start of 2017 state legislative sessions in January, we'll see the reintroduction of most of these bills and more narrowly tailored bills that will target the child welfare system, which is why this guidance now is so critical. We have seen an unprecedented amount of momentum and work being accomplished by this particular administration. HHS has been at the forefront of a lot of that work. ACYF has gone so very far in making strong recommendations about the treatment of LGBTQ youth and LGBTQ parents who engage with this child welfare system, but just short of finishing that work. The administration has been an unequivocal advocate and champion in the context of LGBTQ equality, especially relationship recognition and families in general, lifting up families and protecting them as best they can. But this is a critical piece of the work that is yet left, that is left unfinished. And to see this come to fruition before the end of this particular administration is not only the right thing to do, it's necessary, it's timely, and it serves all 400,000 youth in the foster care system incredibly well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was a very helpful overview of why now and how far we've come and how far we actually still need to go. So next up, I am going to introduce Curry Cook, who is the National Director for Youth and Out-of-Home Care Project at Lambda Legal, as well as a Senior Staff Attorney. And Curry is one of the unique individuals across the country who can masterfully blend policy and practice in a way that I think is rather unique. I think a lot of us are either squarely in one camp or the other, and maybe, around the edges of actually implementing practice and knowing the nuts and bolts of what that takes and being able to be a fierce policy advocate and know the law inside and out. So I am always amazed when I interact with Curry, and I will go ahead and turn it on over to him now to share a little bit about the legal analysis as well as examples of some solid practice across the country, best practices regarding young people who may identify as LGBTQ.
Hi, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here and to have a chance to talk with you all for a little bit. And I just want to say an enormous thank you to Commissioner Lopez and Jenny and the whole staff of the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families. I know it's been an enormous amount of work on their part, and I think have really exercised amazing leadership getting to this place. And I also want to give a big shout out and thanks to all the people both on the stage and also the faces that I can see while looking into these bright lights out in the audience that I know have been working for years and years to make this happen. And also just want to acknowledge that really who also has been making this happen are young people who are in care, who have been out and coming out and being themselves in spite of really, really harsh conditions around them. And, they, like Sixto and others, have really been making a difference because they have forced the people around them to acknowledge who they are as whole people, to change their practice, to combat their biases and challenge the myths and stereotypes that still abound around LGBT people. And I'm really, really excited about this guidance on multiple levels, but one of them is really on the fundamental one for young people in the system to sort of flip the script on this from bad outcomes, bad data, bad public health risk, being viewed as problems in the system, being viewed as a pain to deal with, as we don't have a place for them, and really turning this to celebrating these young people for the awesome kids that they are, and for the people that can be amazing contributors to our society if we just treat them right. And also combating what seems to unbelievably persist in a system that is dedicated, in theory, to the safety, permanency, and well-being of children, and when every single mainstream child welfare, sociological, any kind of organization that has anything to say about the best interests of children has long said that they should actually be treated with dignity and respect, not discriminated against, and be safe. On some level, it's frustrating that it has taken us so long to get here, but I think Emily kind of illustrated many of the reasons why, and so it's long overdue, and so needed. It also kind of takes me to a very personal place, which is as an attorney for kids in foster care my entire career. My first job was in Anchorage, Alaska, as a guardian ad litem for children in foster care and a juvenile delinquency defense attorney. And there, one of my first cases was representing an Alaska Native teenage boy who was struggling with questions of his sexual orientation while in care. And I had only recently come out. So it was especially painful to sort of watch the system not have any appropriate response to him, and actually finding that there was nowhere to turn to. It didn't speak to how he should be treated in law, in policy, in practice. There were no programs, there were no relationships between the scant LGBT-focused services and programs in Anchorage, Alaska, to the child welfare system, and so people didn't know what to do. And as a result, we were of absolutely no help to him, and I barely was, having only my personal experience to turn to, and also noted that I, at that time, had to be very careful about whether I was out and who I was out to people in the system, for fear that some of these myths and stereotypes would also turn back on me and question whether I should be alone with kids and whether I should be, representing children, and some of those things that I think sometimes are still hard to grasp now, that that's the reality, but we actually still see this play out with LGBT young people automatically being put on safety plans just because they're LGBT, or limiting their contact with other people because they're presumed to be sexual predators. Like, these myths and stereotypes still persist in the system. So this guidance is enormously important. To change all of that, both from our fundamental principles to combat all of these myths and stereotypes that still plague youth and families, and also on the legal landscape, which I'll turn to a bit now. So this is significant, as I said, on many levels, but also because, as Emily pointed to in the context of parents and families, and I'm going to focus on youth, in many states, there are no explicit protections for discrimination on account of sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. 16 states have no protections whatsoever in statute, regulation, or policy. And so for those places, this announcement is going to be a game changer, because it is going to require states to take steps to make sure that young people are protected. That said, we know that in all of those states, there are dedicated people on the ground who are doing amazing work on behalf of LGBT young people, and have been tirelessly working to make sure that the systems in those places improve. So while we have seen some really hateful and harmful actions on behalf of executive branch executive branches in many states. We also know that there are a lot of people out there who are really doing good work, who really care about LGBT young people and are making a difference in their communities. And I think that this guidance is going to allow those folks to be more solid, to be able to be more forceful, to stand up, to speak out, and to say, yes, in fact, federal law requires us to support young people and families in our care. Also, I will note that the states that do offer protections for sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression are 26 states. But I want to note that by no means are those protections all holistic and all-encompassing and covering everything. That really notes that someplace in law, in regulation, or in policy somewhere, there's something, which is very encouraging. However, I will say that almost every place has a whole lot to go. I will give a little shout out to New York and California for having some of the best and most explicit protections, and particularly New York City's Administration for Children's Services has a very, very comprehensive LGBT policy, has required training for all foster care agencies and staff, has a very active youth engagement program officially within ACS, and has really been putting policy into practice. And also their policy provides a lot of specifics on exactly what we expect you to do as a caseworker, as a foster parent, as someone engaging with youth to do as you're working with LGBT youth and families. And that is critically important, because even in places where there are explicit protections against discrimination in law or in policy, if there isn't a more fleshed out and fulsome policy that breaks it down and explains the details and training that accompanies that, we know that those protections can be meaningless. So this, while momentous, is really kind of just the beginning in making sure that actually all of these great changes really trickle down to the actual young people in care. And that's going to require a lot of work on all of our parts to make it happen. I do want to say that one of the barriers that I have seen over the years is that oftentimes people who are working for LGBT centers or organizations or LGBT-specific youth-serving agencies have not actually been invited in or intentionally put off by or faced barriers when trying to reach out to the child welfare community. And that has created unnecessary silos where those organizations are both working with the same young people, but they're not working together. And what I think has been amazing is seeing work in places like Florida and Nevada, Texas, where actually child welfare organizations, child placing agencies, providers have been working together with people in the LGBT community and in the child welfare advocacy community as a whole to make these changes, and it has really made a difference. So I'll just note that to sort of sum up on the state law, regulation, and policy, that this is going to be a really important shift for a lot of states, and no doubt there will be some challenges along the way, but I feel confident that we will get through them. And I want to just turn now briefly to talking a little bit about the issues that LGBT youth still face. We kind of put these into these sorts of buckets of thinking about isolation, knowing that a lot of LGBT young people get messages every day that it's not okay for them to be out, and this isolation actually contributes to really negative public health outcomes that they have. So one thing that hopefully this will achieve is really creating a lot of affirming placements so young people can be out, so we can adequately provide services for them as we're required to do in this field. And also, so as Cisco alluded to, they can really be themselves and work through questions that they may be having about their own identities and expression. Others are victimization. We often think about this as like assault and physical victimization, but the psychological victimization that LGBT young people in care experience is profound, and I think underestimated in terms of the damage that it does long term. And putting a stop to that is so important and necessary. Others are differential treatment, so the rules applying differently, say around dating or access to services, thinking about the dilemmas that young people face when they have to disclose or want to disclose their identity or orientation, confidentiality violations, so how do we actually manage this information so it isn't passed on for gratuitous purposes, or it's not unintentionally disclosed without doing it in the proper way. So working through all of these issues is really going to be where it's at as this guidance comes out, and luckily a lot of places around the country have worked through this, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel everywhere. We can take advantage of the promising practices that have been out there. Lack of family-centered services, I think Ellen and others are going to touch upon that, but really thinking about how our work on the prevention side, both to provide family acceptance services to folks and to also hopefully safely return youth home, is critical. Finally, lack of cultural competence among providers is another big one that often many people don't even think about. We make a list of services often and have youth work through their case plan, require them to do things, and we don't ask or inquire about who are those folks we're sending them to. Are they competent? Are we telling a young person that they're failing because they didn't go to the job training program, but they're actively facing harassment and discrimination when they go? Like, really vetting our providers and making sure that they are in fact LGBT competent is just a really fundamental and important piece of making sure that young people are treated fairly. I also just want to show you just a few quick graphics here that kind of illustrate what happens when you don't have affirming services and requirements for non-discrimination. So many of you may be thinking, well, like, this sort of pipeline out to homelessness actually happens to all young people in care, unfortunately, or many, and that's true. But if we think about the lack of family acceptance services, finding kin who are accepting, as the RISE project in LA has been working on so diligently, then we start funneling down to needing kids to be placed out of home. If we don't have affirming homes, then we end up with kids in congregate care, as we heard some of the data Commissioner Lopez mentioned. And then if congregate care isn't safe, we see a lot of juvenile justice involvement flowing out of conflict in non-affirming congregate care. And then we have young people who are on the run and end up at emergency shelters that also may not be supportive of them. As they wind through this, they also drift down our priorities for permanent plans and end up in an APLA with possibly a not an identified affirming placement, and then exit to homelessness. So while this may happen for a non-LGBT youth in care, for LGBT youth in care, it kind of happens on steroids. As do some of these other cycles that I'm going to show you. So briefly for this one, thinking about if you are a young person who's been rejected by your family, and then you have a caseworker who's not supportive of you. If you're being bullied at school around your sexual orientation or gender identity and expression, who's coming to be your champion at school? Right? Who's going to assist you? Who's going to step in and break this cycle? And thinking about additional factors that come into play. If you're a youth of color, which overwhelmingly the young people that we're talking about are, right, discrimination based on multiple aspects of your identity may come into play. If you're undocumented, you also face barriers, right? So this guidance has the opportunity, I think, to break this cycle, or at least maybe try to reduce it for LGBT young people who, again, kind of face all of these challenges on steroids. And finally, I just want to make a note that we have seen an unbelievable criminalization of LGBT young people by systems of care that they're in part of. And many of us are familiar with the school-to-prison pipeline. Unfortunately, we know that there's also a foster care to prison pipeline, and there's a homelessness to prison pipeline, and there's also just walking while a person of color or a trans person, or in particular a trans person of color in society. A current client of ours, an African-American transgender girl in foster care in the Deep South, had all of these pipelines operating on her at the same time and experience congregate care, hospitalization, lock up in a juvenile institution, like largely on account of discrimination based on who she is. So, and we know that when LGBT young people end up in detention facilities or in adult jails, the outcomes and harm that they face there are oftentimes horrific. So anything and everything that we can do to actively stop these pipelines is really going to get at making sure that the young people that we're working with have better outcomes and that we actually are achieving safety, permanency, and well-being for them. Thank you.
Curry. Thank you, Curry. All right, I figured I would sit down since I had this additional microphone here. We'll go ahead and let our panelists know that unfortunately we are running a little bit behind schedule. So we love what you have to say, and we also encourage you to be succinct so that we can get through everyone. So next up we have Ellen Kahn, who is the Director of Children, Youth, and the Children, Youth, and Families Program at the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. Ellen is one of our national leaders around family and youth rights in the LGBT community. The All Children, All Families work that HRC has led across the country has truly been transformative and really has been the product of Ellen and her team's hard work. So to hear more about that, let's pass it on over to Ellen Kahn.
Thank you. I knew I would have to be brief. I figured that out, and I'm ready to be brief. I want to echo the thanks and appreciation to Commissioner Lopez and you, Jenny, and everyone else who has been working collaboratively and so consistently to put into place such important guidance that will move the field further ahead. And I'm going to pick up on the theme of the good things happening and be a bit of a cheerleader. Because as you mentioned, we've been part of a program called All Children, All Families. A few people in the room, like Bill and others, helped us to get this off the ground over 10 years ago. And the goal of this program was to provide a framework for child welfare agencies who really wanted to improve their practice with LGBTQ youth and families, but didn't necessarily know how to go about it. And what's the good news is that since we launched this program, we have had over 80 agencies actively engage with us, all types and sizes, from large statewide agencies like New Jersey's Department of Children and Family Services to working with LA County and Denver and the many multi-site agencies, private but working to find permanent placements for children and youth in foster care. And not just in the blue dots in the blue states, but literally all over the country. And so what that tells me is there are many leaders, because you cannot do this work unless you have the commitment from leadership to really transform their own agency systems and cultures. And I think what this guidance does and why the timing is, the timing would be wonderful anytime, because what it does for many of these leaders who have good intentions but have worried about things like, will I get pushback from some staff who aren't as open or who may have different beliefs that are going to come up as obstacles to really doing this best practice with people? Or I've got so many competing interests. We're trying to implement trauma-informed care, and we're trying to put in a new database, and we're in crisis. How do we do this? Well, this is really serving all youth and families across all your systems of care, but in a much more intentional way. And so the guidance, I think, gives that sort of extra wind under the wings of a lot of folks who have been leaders in their agencies. It kind of strengthens and codifies that this is, in fact, not only the legally sound thing to do, but the thing that's right for the best interest of children. And you've heard all the reasons why. I don't need you to repeat any of that. But I want to just kind of quickly bring down to kind of the micro level. If the guidance were to come out tomorrow, and I know it won't, but let's just say it came out tomorrow, again, knowing that there are competing interests for agency leaders to figure out how do you implement this? How do you ensure there's compliance? And it's everything from every single staff person needs to have a basic understanding of what is sexual orientation, gender identity. How do we talk about LGBTQ people? If you're in a customer service role where you're answering the phone about your next orientation, or you're someone going out to investigate an abuse or neglect case, and you don't know who the members of the household are you assuming everyone is heterosexual because that's the lens, or do you have a way of kind of keeping an eye open and asking appropriate questions, knowing whether sexual orientation and gender identity is ever an issue, and sometimes the issue that's kind of, that needs the most attention on the part of a young person or an adult. So, we know training is essential. So, the keys to success: agency leadership, commitment from the top down, looking at how you implement a best practice process across all systems, that you communicate clearly, that it's not just, the guidance, of course, will be the impetus for many agencies, but that this is the right thing to do. It's the best practice. And even if there's some challenges or hitches, around people, I guess, assessing what the guidance itself means and how deep it goes, that you can start taking these steps right away. Put a team in place. Leadership, what we've seen most successful, especially in our large agencies, county and state and multi-site agencies, is assigning a team of people who have a shared ownership. It's not just the lesbian social worker, like take this on, or but really it's everybody's responsibility, and hold people accountable. Do you have folks doing quality improvement work? Do you have folks committed to your diversity and inclusion efforts? People who really will own and lead this, and it's treated as any other essential system change work that you've done. Use those models and sort of think about this as kind of having the same trajectory and the same comprehensive approach. And then just thinking about all the elements. Carrie mentioned policy, and we know how important written policy is, and that a lot of agencies might think the existence of this guidance when it comes out is then just understood to be the policy, but we think that at the agency level, you want to have explicit policies that are inclusive of all of sexual orientation, gender identity, expression. And then everyone needs to know what that means. What are the expectations, as Carrie was saying? How do you create a welcoming environment? What's the language people hear when they come in? What images do they see? What's on your website? What's on your brochures? Is there information for youth who might be LGBTQ so that they know that you're speaking to them and seeing that they're there? Are there systems of support across, if you have orientations for prospective foster parents, do you acknowledge that you have among the group parents who might be LGBTQ and speak to them and speak in ways that include them? If you have support groups for young people, do you acknowledge that some people are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning? So it's looking at all those places where those microaggressions take place, as Sixto was talking about. Silence and neutrality can certainly be interpreted as rejection and lack of support. So everyone needs to be be welcoming in everything they say in explicit ways. And then looking at every area of practice, from the folks who are, again, answering the phone to going out and doing home studies. If you're going out to do a home study with a same-sex couple or someone who's transgender and you've not worked with that community, I know there are going to be a lot of yellow and red flags about whether you're going to get a fair, unbiased home assessment. And there you're missing an opportunity for a permanent placement for a child. When you're matching children, is that bias coming into play when a social worker who's working with a 16-year-old kid says, well, he doesn't want to be with the same-sex couple. That's going to be a problem. But no one's actually talked to the young person, and it's really the social worker's bias that's getting in the way. How do we assess what youth are comfortable with and how they understand different kinds of families? And then how do we prepare all foster families and adoptive families, not just the LGBTQ families, to be affirming and supportive, and to know when they're not and how we're going to handle that, because that's a red flag around safety, permanency, and well-being. So I just want to make the point about how you do this work, how you pivot from the guidance being launched to really being a leader and being intentional in everything you do in your agency. And programs like mine and others provide a lot of the tools and resources and steps to making that happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Next up, we have Diego. Come on down. Diego Sanchez is the policy director at PFLAG. And prior to this current role, he was the first transgender individual to serve as a staff member on Capitol Hill in our U.S. Congress. And I met Diego when we both worked on the Hill, and always been such a fan because his warmth and welcoming style and nature is just palpable as soon as you meet him. So take it away, Diego.
Thanks so much, and I'll be quick so that you can like me too. Like Sexto, I'm a product of this system. I was adopted by my parents, and their promise was that they would adopt the person closest to death, and that was me. I knew, as I grew up as a little kid, that I owed my life to my parents. So when I was 5 years old and I knew I had to tell them that I was born wrong, that I felt like a boy, I thought I was going to either be given away or harmed. When I told my parents, they left the room. My mother came back, and in her hand, I thought I was going to be looking at something that these days is illegal, wasn't back then. She had a book. She had a magazine with Christine Jorgensen on the cover. Christine Jorgensen was the first well-known transsexual person, and she was a woman. My mom said, I don't know if there are other people like you who were born a girl and feel like they're a boy, but this woman was born a boy, became a man, and then later became herself. So if it's okay for her, and that was in 1961, she says, by the time you grow up, I think it will be okay. I am so blessed by having those parents, because you know how the outcome could have been with anyone else, and I was just 5. There was no PFLAG then, but today there is. And it draws me to a family, the Newbeckers, who were in the amicus briefs that Emily was mentioning that Justice Kennedy looked at and referenced in his comments. The Newbecker family is a pair of grandparents, Michael and Janice, who are PFLAG members, and their son, Lee, and his husband, David, his partner, David, at the time. They're in Michigan, as Emily mentioned, in Michigan. And they have 2 kids. They have Braden, and they have Michael, named for their grandfather. They got those kids, Lee and David got those kids, Braden and Michael, through the foster care system, had them for 3.5 years, and then were finally able to adopt them. But as a same-sex couple, they fought so hard to make that happen, despite the love that they had from their parents, from Michael and Janice. The last thing I want to say to you is that people like you, and including you, make the difference as to whether Braden gets to go to bed, as she mentioned when she was at the press conference and talked to reporters traveling from Michigan to D.C., saying that she gets to go to sleep with the comfort of love instead of the fear of danger for her and her little brother. You are that difference. And this guidance, thank you so much, Raphael, and thank you so much, Jenny, because we've been hanging out and talking about this, and we've been talking about this for so long in the what-if stages, and now it's real. But it's really real when you guys make that rubber hit the road, when the policies become practice, as Ellen was mentioning as well. It's in your hands as to whether people like me, far younger than I, will be able to come up someday and talk to the next generation of you about the 3rd generation of myself. So please make it real. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Diego. So we have concluded our remarks. We would love to hear from the audience. Questions, comments, anything else that you would like to say. The floor is yours. There is a microphone there for those that are currently present physically in this room. And I believe there are also some questions that may be coming to us via the live stream questions feed. So I'm sure someone will bring those up to us as they come in. Anybody else in the audience, feel free, step on up to the microphone. I know this is not a shy audience.
Oops, it's loud. I'm Amy Hance. I'm a program specialist with the Children's Bureau in the Kansas City Regional Office, and so we work with the states of Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. I have the fortunate opportunity to work with the state that I think is fairly progressive with this. I work with Iowa. They actually have a curriculum that they established with one of our formerly National Resource Centers to develop a curriculum for foster parents to work with LGBTQ youth. Proud of that for Iowa. However, I think in light of all our guidance, what I think is going to be important is not just recognizing that there are states who may be challenged or have some barriers on the legislative side, but on the practice side, on the practical side. Iowa asked me in May, and I channeled Commissioner Lopez in my answer. It's going now. They asked me in May, they had a particular situation with a transgender youth who was unfortunately in congregate care. And They basically looked at me and said, "What's your guidance? What do we do?" I mean, this is a congregate care situation where they have male and female units. Where do we put this youth? And I said, well, I'm going to channel Commissioner Lopez, and I said, ask the youth. Ask them where they would feel safe, where they would feel comfortable, what they want. And that was my answer. And I don't know if it was the right answer or not, but that's what I said. And then right after that meeting with them, we had the webinars in June. I referred them to the webinars, but I mean, it's a webinar. So hopefully the conversations continue, and the states, all of our states and providers can get some really concrete ideas and guidance in terms of not just what we expect in terms of fair treatment, but how do they really intentionally do that? So I just wanted to say that. Not really a question, but just more of a comment. And if you have ideas or feedback, that'd be great to hear too.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And great to meet you. We have staff that are within the ACYF family that we never get to see because we work in different offices all across the country. So first off, I think in terms of our own internal process, we've been having conversations both with regional office team members like yourself and central office team members in the Children's Bureau about we need to train ourselves, and then we can be able to feel more equipped to answer these questions. And so that is our intent as we look at rolling out this guidance, is getting ourselves up to speed on how we do go about answering those questions. And then we have a fabulous array of partners, both here on the stage and in the audience, that are going to help us do this work. And so we're going to work together with everybody to make sure that states and counties, an individual caseworker has what they need, the right training, the right tools, and it will be a work in progress. Change is not automatic, but we will work together to make this guidance a reality.
And then, Jenny, what I would say, can we hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's some really good mics there. So the other thing is, like, when I think about the guidance, right, and feel free to push back anybody, but some of the guidance is just the legal paperwork to cover your own butt to do the right thing. Right? Like, let's think about it. When we're making these decisions, we shouldn't be thinking to ourselves, am I doing, am I doing the right thing in terms of not getting fired? But, the system exists for one thing. One is to make sure that young people have families, and while we're finding you a family, while we're reunifying you with the family, whatever stage you're in, it is our duty while you are in our care to make sure that we are maximizing your development to thrive. So when we're making decisions, it should always correlate with am I setting this child up to thrive, right? So to me, I think that the guidance is what we look to so that you can say, am I not going to get fired for doing the right thing? But that may not have how things work, but that was kind of my interpretation.
Right. Well, it doesn't get into the nitty-gritty of practice. So I think, sex-segregated congregate care is kind of the next frontier, and all of us, I think, get calls daily around, I have a trans girl, but I'm worried for her safety if she's in the female unit, and if, I can't put her in the male unit. And, we've seen both horrific decisions made that further alienate and stigmatize trans kids, and then we've seen folks, just as you were saying, you're a girl, of course you're going to go in the girls' unit, and we're going to make sure that the other kids are kind to you and that the staff is supportive. But those are the better case scenarios, and we don't have nearly enough of them. So again, training, there's so much out there, and there'll be so much more coming, and hopefully you'll be able to, find everything you need and be in touch with us when those kinds of things come up.
And if I can, I'll just add, I think when we've had trans young people who are then thinking about their own safety and making decisions about where they want to be and involve them, that unfortunately the system has failed to make all of the spaces safe. So they may be engaging in a very accurate analysis that going to the girls' unit may not be safe for them. And so the work that we have to do is to make sure that all the spaces are safe and that we've done the work peer-to-peer with staff, to really get there so young people are able to go where they want to go, where is most beneficial from them in every aspect in terms of their emotional well-being and their health, And I think the good news is, as Ellen mentioned, there are places out there who have been successfully placing trans youth in accord with their gender identity, and I think the administrators in those places are going to be invaluable to share with their colleagues across the country. This is actually how I did it, like peer-to-peer, as an administrator running a group home or a detention facility or those sorts of places.
So we'll take one additional question. One additional question. It looks like we have maybe a question from the online
Yep, we do.
live stream.
Yes, this one came in from one of our virtual participants, was an alumnus of CARE, and the individual asked, will there be a youth version or edition of policies? So I think maybe like guidance for youth or something specific for youth.
Sure. So the guidance is inclusive of both youth and parents, both prospective parents and birth parents, any kind of parent, adoptive, birth, foster, youth, and parents.
So Jenny, I think, some people might hear that and just be like, oh, are you just saying a bunch of nice words to like sugarcoat that it's inclusive? But can you describe how you guys took the extra step to make sure that it was something that young people and parents, when they read it and see it, that it is inclusive for them? Because I think some other folks, not you guys, I know how hard you work, but some other folks, they'll say those words and you'll look at that document and say, man, even the adults can't read this who wrote it. But go ahead.
Yes. So we have a lot of wonky documents at ACYF. And can I promise you, Sixto, that the guidance that we release or the policy announcement is not going to be wonky? No, I cannot. But what I can promise you, because we want to outline the very specific statutory language that we are citing to make our legal argument about why this is not only right, but legally sound. But what we will also do is we will do some webinars, some outreach in partnership with organizations that are very youth-focused. We will also ensure that we are creating fact sheets, videos, and hopefully, Sixto, you could help us develop those, and Lexi, who's sitting right here, who's one of our Children's Bureau youth consultants, so that we're not just guessing what might be youth inclusive, but we are basing it on folks' lived experience. Does that help, Sixto?
And I'll add, I can hedge bets that every organization represented on this stage will have fact sheets that break it down in very digestible language for people to understand what the guidance does for different audiences. So,
I think too that we do confront a universal challenge here that we have to work against and make better generally, which is just all young people in care having an understanding of what their rights are in care and hearing that, and actually having a meaningful, youth-friendly, clear, real grievance process and accountability to folks when they do grieve, and safety from retaliation if they do. So those are some real challenges out there, and I think we need to zero in on how that is going to play out with this guidance, and also using some of the good examples from jurisdictions that have tried to communicate youth rights in this area, and engaging young people in helping craft that.
I think that's a great point. And we welcome everyone's input and feedback in the audience here in the room and on the live stream to tell us how we should go about a grievance process, a reporting process. We are going to announce when we do have our formal rollout of this guidance what we have tentatively come up with, which we are working out still and finalizing. But we know it is likely not to be perfect, and we always have room to grow. So feel free, send us your ideas now or at any time over the next couple of months, even after the policy announcement is made, because we want to make sure that there is a way for young people to say, I'm not being treated right here, and I need your help, federal government or local county government, to make sure that my rights are protected. Here's what I know from the fact sheet that the Children's Bureau sent over to me, my caseworker, but this is not actually happening. How do I actively try to ensure that I am no longer discriminated against, and who actually cares? Who's listening to me? So those are the sorts of things that we need your help figuring out. Of course, we'll provide a kind of grievance form or incident form that we hope to be able to release that people can utilize to provide what's happening, provide a little synopsis of what's occurring that will be the basis of which we can use to follow up. But we know that we're going to have to sort of evolve and improve our process after we roll this out.
I'd say realize how historic this is, because most things about which we have rights, we know what our rights are before the professionals are given the ways to make them happen. And this guidance is actually going to either be concurrent or leading. So that makes it really, it warms my heart a lot.
Well, on that note of warming hearts, we are going to wrap up, and I would like to invite Commissioner Rafael Lopez back up to the stage to wrap us up.
So thank you all so much, and please join me in another round of applause for our panelists, who are extraordinary in so many ways. There are times in our collective lives as a country where the stars align, and if we, none of the questions were plants, truthfully. And those of us who have worked conferences know that sometimes they are, right? But let us say that how beautiful it was that the questions that were asked happened now. And I want to lift up Amy's question in her own work as a regional representative of the federal government, right? Because when Amy or our other staff who are at 10 regional offices, it's not just Amy who's Amy, it's Amy, the United States of America. And why it's important to say that is that much the way in which we opened, whether you're a judge or a lawyer or a child welfare social worker or the young person in care or a parent, or any configuration of your title, we are again entering an era where the honest answer is we just don't know how this is all going to work out. And to say that publicly, again, outs our humanity. That in fact we are going to use the legal framework and the system to release what I'm sure Sixto will say was, what the heck is this, does this mean exactly? And let us also own, not only that appropriate question, the very system, the tools we use as a government across the nation, within counties, within cities, do not interact with its citizens in the way that they can and should. And that's part of what I believe, personally, this president has helped us understand in a very different way. A modern president that used social media to craft his own narrative and his own narrative of including people, from using things like YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and a variety of blogs in a way that no one had ever had because they hadn't existed before. So I say this because Amy's act, her individual act of courage, of saying, why don't you ask the young person, is her own act of organizing herself and her community in a way that no one else can because she knows her community best. And at the end of the day, I think Sixto is right in that no policy announcement, when it's ready to go, will change anything, especially hearts and minds. That can only be done with us. And it's our individual acts of courage to say, you are beautiful, you are extraordinary, and within our own networks and in our homes and in our neighborhoods, model the very kinds of extraordinary societal change we have seen throughout this country, era after era after era. One need only look in our most recent history around the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act, where the very legal framework, much the way one would imagine in that era, they did a version of this, not with PowerPoint, not with all this technology, but the same exact concept. A few brave souls stood up, asked questions, answered questions, wrote up a legal framework, and then we thought, oh, how do we interpret this at the most basic fundamental level so that every person can understand, I have the right to vote in America. I have the right to marry who I want in America. I have the right to be a young person in foster care in America and be educated and be treated with dignity and respect and to receive health care. We don't know how to do that well yet. We are on the journey to that. So as we think about closing this work and tying it to the overall conference, remember that each of you are your own ambassadors in your own networks. No one can tell your story. No one knows your community better than you do. No policy framework, no law, no guidance can ever change that. It is you in your individual acts that will do this. So when you leave this room or leave us virtually as you're streaming in, you might ask yourself, what might I do to help change hearts and minds around all youth in care, especially our LGBTQ youth in care, or the families who are fighting to adopt or to foster simply because they want to raise and love a child. These kinds of questions, again, out our humanity. And these, I believe, and I believe all of my partners here and many of you here today, are things that are not insurmountable. Because to be loved is something that all of us want. To be cherished is something that all of us want. And to be told, I love you, is something that all of us want. So with that in mind, thank you so much for your courage. Thank you for what you're going to do next, and have a wonderful evening.